Okay, so your horse's name is Sochi,
You got
S-O-C-H-I?
it. Yep.
Sochi. Okay.
Yes. Yep. Like the city in Russia. Yeah.
Okay. And anything you have questions about before we start looking at your videos?
Yeah. So generally speaking, I have been kind of trying to find one of like the more webinar oriented videos of yours that speaks directly to like the kinematics of the legs when rotation is happening. Because I just want to make sure like if I kind of get something analytically, I can start to put it in feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so just whether we talk about it now or whether you take a moment in the video later to discuss, okay, when X is happening with rotation, it changes the kinematics of the legs in Y way. And if it's not that black and white, I totally get that.
I can
But
give you some generalizations that are very helpful
cool.
because everything I look at, and the long reins are the groundwork exercise that can address two specific spinal functions in two different ways. So,
Mhm.
sort of depending on the horse, but everything I do is based on understanding four essential spinal functions for basic balance, basically eliminating all lateral bending in the work until we have the axial skeleton stabilized.
Absolutely.
So the inner skeleton, the skull, spine, rib cage, and I include the pelvis, even though technically that's not accurate, is the axial skeleton. So then the limbs are the appendicular skeleton. And there's four essential functions we need to know about with the spine because as we coordinate the axial skeleton, that is what changes the kinematics of the limbs. It changes the soft tissue use throughout the body, and it changes joint function in every joint of the body. So I just go to the midline of the horse and the rider and focus there.
Yeah.
So the way I order the spinal functions is the first thing I put together is alignment, which is really, you don't think of alignment as a spinal function. And we're trying to lift the back and do lateral work with the vertebra kind of subluxated, not quite in alignment, or these invisible habitual lateral bends or
Mhm.
rotations.
Mhm.
So the alignment of the spine, of course, the bones and the spine itself is never geometrically straight. But when it is correctly aligned, it produces a broomstick straight line of force. It feels very stable. So alignment is sort of the first function. And when it comes to the long reins, that's specifically addressed when we ground drive. So
Yeah.
when we position ourselves behind the horse and we're sort of alternating rein use left and right, that is very specific, very directly, I should say, very directly addressing the alignment of the spine until we get that stabilization. The other part of a lateral movement of the spine is rotation, right? So in us, it's this twisting motion as opposed to side bending motion, but the
Yeah.
two are kind of interrelated. So if we take that twisting motion on a horse, from our perspective, it's a left right shift or rock of the pelvis and a left right rolling of the barrel,
Mhm.
right? And then the two other important spinal functions are the up down direction. So spinal or longitudinal extension, once we have the spine working as one unit, because the goal of rotation is to stabilize it, to
Right.
reduce all twisting,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And what we call a left-handed horse is typically the dorsal tips of the spine on a habitual left kind of off center.
Yep. And that would be basically then pushing the lower portion of the barrel of the horse into the rider's right leg.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Just
Yeah.
so I'm thinking it would be like kind of against the left thigh and then the right calf.
Yes.
I'm thinking,
So
okay. Just, yeah.
the horse's body weight and skeleton is sort of shifting left, but
Mhm.
the muscle tension and the
Oh,
bulk
right.
of the barrel are on the right.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. Yeah.
And what
And it
that's going to
does,
do as far as leg kinematics is that barrel, and it's chicken and egg where it starts. But once the barrel is too far right, you're blocking the forwardness of the right hind leg. And typically the left shoulder is dropping, the left front leg is overloaded. So
Gotcha.
there's almost always this diagonal relationship between a hind and front leg when we're talking about lateral bending and rotation.
Makes total sense.
That's where
Just
you get,
helpful and down. Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that's where you get one-sided movement,
absolutely.
right?
And
Horse won't
I
pick
like
up
this.
that lead or even the saddle slipping to one side, always related to lateral bending and rotation.
Yeah.
So then spinal extension or longitudinal extension is the downward direction for our horse,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
then longitudinal flexion is the upward direction of the spine.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
And that's a long explanation, but that's what it's called. So
No,
we just go with that.
yep. No, I really appreciate that level
Mhm.
of depth. Just because I teach as well with the riding, and so the more I am able to really understand it first in me and then in feel with the horses, and then a bit starting to help to also bring it when it's relevant, which is all the time, to
Yes.
my own being
Yeah,
able to
so
communicate.
like in the rider, because we're vertical, our axial skeleton, we're trying to reduce the movement of the vertebra, both reducing twisting, reducing bending, that's left, right, but we're also in humans trying to balance between. If we have too much extension, we're arched, and if we
Right.
have too much flexion, we're rounded. So we're trying to balance between flexion and extension.
Yep.
The horse is quite different in that any degree of downward spinal extension, what that's going to do is all the top line muscles, you can kind of imagine that when the horse drops the spine, that all the muscles of the body are sort of shortening and the energy is coming inward,
Okay. Like
right?
push down.
It's sort of inward and down.
In
And
okay.
and
Yep.
so what that's going to do to the legs is it makes the front legs very base
Narrow.
narrow
Mhm.
and it makes the hind legs sort of base narrow.
Mhm.
It also, that downward direction of the spine is going to disengage the pelvis. The
Yeah.
hind legs are going to be able to track backwards longer or to a greater distance than they can track forward,
Yep. That makes
right?
total sense.
So you can
Yep.
almost think of the drop torso blocking the forward motion of the leg. So the pelvis is rotating lower in front, higher in
Going
back.
back. Yep. And the legs are going out
Yeah.
that way. Yep. And
And
yep.
I always forget what's cranial and caudal and what the point of reference is on the pelvis. So I just go forward and back.
Totally. The only thing I'm good with there is lateral and medial, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so when horses flex the spine, um, when they lift the back, they can't over round the back. It's physically impossible, like we
Okay.
can, right? So when horses, what we call rounding the back in a horse is nothing like a human at
Right.
all. But
Right.
people are looking for that when they stimulate the belly. And I
Yeah.
go, that's
Belly lift.
actually, it's a dysfunctional use. It's kind of a cat stretch. They can do it, but it's not flexion.
Right.
So the first objective with every horse I work with, because it can happen at every level to different degrees of horses dropping the back.
Mhm.
And this is the interesting sort of uh, coordination of the spine. Whenever a horse pushes downward with the back, it creates hyperrotation.
Okay.
And it can be symmetrical or asymmetrical, but you're going to get a rocking back and forth. And what I've noticed is that visually, as well as through feeling, we don't really feel the drop of the back because it's kind of a minimal movement of the spine, but we do see and feel the hyperrotation, which is the side effect.
Yes.
So
Yep.
that's going to create, if you're working on the long reins and you even put a bareback pad on to see it, right? When we see the saddle or something on the horse's back doing that, or even if it's asymmetrical, more
So yeah,
one-sided.
I usually see, without the pad or anything, just because I've been taught to look now,
Mhm.
just almost always that it's asymmetrical, and then that it can sometimes shift in its asymmetry, but it is, yeah, it's every horse has it to various degrees.
We're all
Um,
one-sided. Like the straightness issue is huge. So what I call internal straightness, which is primarily what I'm working on in the on the long reins, internal straightness is the combination of stabilizing the rotation. So you can imagine the spinous processes remain upright, that the pelvis is level side to side, right?
Yep.
The back is level across the barrel, and getting the correct alignment, stabilizing, reducing lateral bend. So what I call internal straightness is alignment plus rotation
Yep.
equals internal straightness.
Gotcha.
What's in that is the way I get horses out of extension is I focus on internal straightness, even though that hyper rotation is the side effect. So I don't ever try to get a horse from down to up. If
Right.
they're
'Cause that's
if
the
they're
symptom.
down,
Yep.
I'm going to get internal straightness, and that's going to allow a gentle upward direction of the spine
Gotcha.
and re-engaging the pelvis. Does that make
And
sense?
absolutely. Do you find that like the path for each horse is unique as far as whether you deal with rotation or alignment first? Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Because like I said, the worst possible, most dysfunctional use of the horse's body is what I call the posture of extension. It's
Which most of
longe,
them,
which if you look around, it's not uncommon.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
really diplomatic. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
It's not uncommon.
it
Yeah.
is not uncommon.
Yeah.
And so that is the most destabilizing skeletally for the horse's body. It also happens to be the physiological fear response. That
Mm-hmm.
posture is associated with fight flight,
Mm-hmm.
right? So anytime we're in fear, that's startle. Same
Totally.
for the horse. So we're kind of battling this instinctual use as well as it's just like if we're about to fall and we lose our stability, we do the same thing.
Absolutely.
So that's why it perpetuates so much. And it
And
takes training to get out of that. So
lot. Yeah.
when they're in the posture of extension, we have lost internal straightness and we've disengaged the pelvis. So what's unique to each horse is which one needs help first.
Yeah.
We have to
Yeah.
fix both, but some horses we need to start focusing on engagement right away because they either won't move forward or they can't control their forward. They're too
Yeah.
fast,
Yep.
right? If they kind of have good control over their speed and they have a pretty regular rhythm, whether it's a little slow or a little fast, that indicates that they kind of have enough stability through the pelvis that we could focus on straightness as the
Yep.
path out. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And
Absolutely.
and like I said, if we think of spinal flexion is almost a lengthening outward direction of the body, and extension is sort of a shortening inward direction to the body. You can kind of understand the leg kinematics that way because that inward direction is going to pull the limbs inward,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Where that outward direction is going to start squaring the legs under this
Gotcha.
torso. That's how
Gotcha.
it affects the leg kinematics. And then if we kind of complicate it with a little bit of a twist and a bend,
Yeah, that's where I get confused and would love more help. Yep.
so now you have a horse that's crooked and an extension. When you go to make a turn, instead of, say, on a left turn, the left front leg abducting away from the
And
midline,
absolutely. Yep.
it'll
Yep.
start to go to the midline.
Across. Yep.
And
Right.
that's what we call a drop shoulder,
Gotcha.
right?
Gotcha.
Or they bulge through the outside shoulder and escape. So we're obsessed with shoulders, but I go, it's the spinal alignment between the shoulders that actually keeps them upright and changes the leg kinematics.
I think it's so hard when we are riding and we are humans and we're connected to our hands and we're connected to our eyesight. And of course, the shoulders we feel more and the neck we see more. And it is very hard for us to process what's happening under the seat and behind the saddle,
Yeah,
even though
and
that's the root symptom or root cause, rather. Yeah.
yes, and it's just a matter of where we put our focus
Yeah.
because we can all feel it, but we're not trained to pay attention to it. We're just trained to pay attention to other things that are visually easier for us,
Right.
right?
Right.
But really, we all have the ability to feel. And in the process of balancing horses, if they're in extension or they're crooked, they're going to also be stabilizing on the outer muscles
Mm.
versus the inner skeleton coordination.
Yeah.
They're also going to be stabilizing from the withers forward rather than from the withers backward. So
Yeah.
the way the horse controls their own body weight from their front legs, even with this long neck and heavy head, it's all about what's happening from the front of the saddle to the tail.
Yeah. And then I
Uh,
think, at least in my mare's case, like where you add something like EPM in, and that's not uncommon, or
yes,
Lyme for a lot of other horses, or anything that's neurologically going to start to affect
yes,
wiring, nerve connect. Yep. And it just makes that back end awareness that
that
much harder,
much. Yes,
muscling that much. Yep. Yep.
yes. When you have that kind of, and so your mare, I had the email pulled up and
Oh
I
yeah,
didn't
I can
write it
just,
down.
yeah,
She,
yeah,
okay,
no worries. So she's 15 now, Canadian warm blood, so actually half saddlebred, half Westphalian. So unique breeding. And she came to me almost 6 years ago. Not with any standing diagnoses yet, but there was so much happening in the body and in her constant, like she was basically always in sympathetic arousal, always. And just extremely sore through the whole top line. And I used to go the route of, inject everything, and I learned a lot better now, so that's great.
no, and
Um,
that's the saddlebred part you get. Yeah, yeah, they're very sensitive and yes.
yeah,
And it was a
and
popular combination when dressage competition changed from wanting those big length of strides into wanting more suspension. And they started crossing with saddlebreds, very popular for a few years.
yeah,
And I
no,
go, you didn't realize how much hot blood you were putting in there, though.
very much, and just how hard it is to get the back there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Well, the pelvic stability to get the back. So for her, basically over the years, as I got a little bit better at understanding sort of systemic things, I started to press on the vets, and we pulled an EPM titer and she came positive. But the bigger thing was she really responds to treatment.
great.
Um, so yeah, so we at least know, okay, what medicine works best, because that's half the battle.
Yes,
Because yeah, some EPM horses just don't respond to rebalance, others do, some need marquee, so bottom line is that's more under control now,
great.
but it also has definitely increased my awareness, as far as it has been very hard to get like the gluteal muscles and her SI area not be atrophied. They still are. Like when you just feel it's visually, it's obvious,
Mhm.
but then when you feel in that area, there's just no muscle there. There's nothing. And of course I've seen worse, but because it's my own horse and because I'm a professional, it's like, oh, why can't I get this better?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so that's one thing with her. And
And then you
then,
mentioned, I think, a DSLD prognosis back and forth. You see that
yeah,
to me, you already described the problem with the muscles. So without those hindquarter muscles and axial skeleton stability, usually the fetlock takes the brunt, right?
most
And
time.
if there's any issue because the extensor and flexor tendons are connected in the hind legs all the way up to the stifle.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
what happens is if you have any arthritis or lack of muscle, lack of control around the stifle joint or the hock joint, they're going to underflex and the fetlock
Oh,
typically overflexes.
that
And the
makes it.
DSLD, I go, when it's real DSLD, it's almost systemic through the body. It's not just the fetlocks. And it is degenerative. And so every ultrasound, when you work them at all, even good work, is going to show deterioration.
Yep.
And
And
a
I,
client of mine in Wisconsin, they rehabbed a horse, two of them shared a horse, and the ex-lesson horse was diagnosed with DSLD. And I said, work with your vet, start on the ground, take it easy. They spent a year, maybe even two, doing groundwork, and the very same vet reversed the diagnosis.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
And
it's a tricky diagnosis, especially when it's like suspected DSLD or early stages, because part of the reason, so basically there's two vets that have seen her for this. Part of the reason one of the vets was thinking DSLD was because she's a mare where you kind of look the wrong way and you have another tendon injury. So she and like that may or may not, again, it could go to the instability because she basically, it was right
The
hind, left front,
EPM.
right hind, left
Hmm.
front, and the EP. And so left front has struggled with a superficial digital flexor tendon injury up by the carpal canal that flares up and calms down and flares up and calms down. And so, and originally, the thing that kind of got us looking at her hind suspensories was a proximal suspensory on the right hind. So it's for her, that right hind, left front diagonal pair has been an issue. And then when they actually look at her branches, her hind branches of the suspensory on ultrasound, they're not horrible. That's when the
Oh,
vets are like,
good.
yeah,
Okay.
it's like, a little bit on the left hind. I don't need to get into the weeds on this one, but it's the vets aren't like, don't ride her. It's just like, be careful, be aware, and just listen to her. If she
Hmm.
doesn't want to trot, don't trot her.
Yeah.
Because she's not unsound. As far like she moves very differently now than she used to. She used to move way out of her own range of movement, and just in pure tension. And now her gaits are tiny and the movement is extremely restricted, but she's not technically lame. Um,
Bingo.
so
Because what you're dealing with, and it can be some warm bloods, my warm blood happens to be a hypermobile warm blood. He moves like a giant Arabian, right?
yeah,
And whenever you get any version of any gated horse genetics, you're going to also get hypermobility.
yeah, yeah,
Even the
yeah.
saddlebreds, they're not technically gated, but they're kind of in that genetic
Yeah,
family.
yep.
And so the hypermobility, everybody's like, wow, there's so much action. And it's
So
completely,
pretty.
it's
Yeah.
there is no core stability. And so they
Mhm.
end up damaging themselves. So the left front could be a concussive issue, especially if it's related to the right hind, which is a restriction issue,
Right.
right? And the soft tissue is sort of taking the brunt of the hypermobility through the skeleton because you're just putting too much stretch
Yeah.
on the soft tissues. And that's good that you've already brought her to a place of stability where the movement is now, I would say, more controlled. People
Yeah.
say slow and terrible. And I go, but
We look
it's,
like a 20-year-old quarter horse when we trot,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And that's a good building point. That's where you can build up from. Absolutely. And what you have with EPM is she had her own habits of movement,
Mhm.
right? So, like I said, that startle posture is instinct. So, horses that are sensitive and prone to get afraid, they wind up there a lot.
Yeah,
Horses that are very hypermobile also wind up there because it's a way that the body temporarily stabilizes in order to have the power for fight or
makes total
flight.
sense. Yep.
But over time, it has a detrimental effect on health. It's not meant to be sustained. But we train horses that way because they have more power.
Yep. Yep. And
So,
yeah, when you're showing, you get the eights instead of the sixes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so let's take a look. Do you feel like I've answered your questions on just general
Very much. No, thank you.
function?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And what the EPM is going to do is when the spinal fluid and the central nervous system is sort of affected, it has two interesting side effects. Obviously, you have a hypermobile horse that's now more hypermobile because it's going to create instability in all horses. It's a layer above the layer that was maybe there naturally. Her
Mhm.
natural MO is a
Mhm.
little more complicated, right? But interestingly, the EPM can also, in a sense, wipe the slate clean.
Mhm.
And so you kind
I
of
like
have
that
an,
outlook.
yeah, you kind of have an opportunity because everything is just a wreck that when you start to move the body towards the ideal function of alignment, stable rotation, increasing flexion, increasing pelvic stability, old horses, sick horses, lame horses, compromised horses, they almost take to the work faster
Mm,
because they have such a need for stability. They no longer have those outer muscles overworking that are
yeah.
sort of holding them together like most young horses.
Yep.
And so she should really sort of take to the changes, and you should see a lot of progress faster than if she were young and strong and kind of
Right. Could
stuck in
compensate
her.
better that way. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
So it's the good news, bad news. Like
Yeah.
just think of it as a clean slate.
Yeah.
And and then let's look at your videos. Oops, shoot. Hang on, let me do that again. I forgot to optimize the video and it like gets
Oh,
really
sure.
catchy if I don't click that
Gotcha.
button. So I want the Google. I want to optimize. There
You
we
must have
go.
become like a tech wizard trying to learn how to do all of this remotely with people.
I've gotten better. I'm in the land of video and video editing now, which is a new learning curve. But
Yeah.
some of the
Yeah.
others I've got the hang of. Okay, so I guess we'll just start.
Start level. Yep.
Yeah, there we go.
And the only reason why that very short 30-second clip at the end there with my fiance walking her was just to kind of get a rear view of her hand walking, just so you could kind of get a little bit of what it would look like if I were behind her on the long lines, just to see the
Yeah.
dysfunction basically in her hind end. But that's the only reason that was there.
So you've got a lot of good things going already. Um, she's still in extension, and the way
Very much.
you want to look at extension visually is, like I said, all of the top line muscles, when the spine goes down, the back muscles, top of the pelvic muscles, and what we see most obviously are the neck muscles, go into what's called a concentric contraction, shortening contraction.
Okay.
Was that it?
So concentric just means shortening.
So there's four types of muscle contractions scientifically.
Mm.
Concentric means the muscle fibers are shortening. Eccentric means the muscle fibers are lengthening. Isometric means the muscle fibers are not lengthening or shortening, they're just holding at a
Okay.
specific length.
Okay.
And isotonic is the muscles are contracted and changing length.
Okay. Is there one that's ideal or it's very situational?
It's situational, but each type of muscle use is part of sort of how we assess balance visually and what we feel. So anytime the horse is dropping the back, they're going to have concentric shortening contraction through the neck, back, and pelvis.
Mm.
So that's going to make the neck look shorter. And
Yep.
by shorter, if we think of the typical startle response, the neck is shortening, the pole is up. But it can also be an over curling of the neck,
Yep. We
forward and
have
downward.
all of the above. Yes.
hmm
Yep.
So when I look at her neck while you're moving, right, you can see, you can kind of look at the top of the neck along the mane. When they drop the pole, that's a little bit of the shortening contraction. When they
Mm.
elevate the pole and they get a bulge at the base of the neck, that's the
Mhm.
cervical spine bulging out. That's a
Yes.
shortening contraction,
Yep.
right? So the way we know, and this was so fascinating, it just kept happening. And then I discovered afterwards, it is a known dynamic, voluntary, predictable response that when you get internal straightness, the combination of alignment and stable rotation, that's what changes the muscle use.
Mm.
It instantly lengthens the muscles of the top line because now the skull, spine, rib cage, and pelvis is finding the stability that it should have. And so what they do is they lengthen, and we can see it especially in groundwork, particularly through the neck. So there she shortens, 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 which means she's getting crooked or dropping the back. And then as you continue working with her, there's moments, and I just want to point it out, that there's moments where the pole and head move forward and away from the
Yep.
torso. The mane gets straight along the top, and you
Yep.
can kind of see the brachius muscles lengthen.
Yep. Yep. Gotcha.
That spontaneous, voluntary use of her head and neck is reflecting internal straightness always.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's
Okay.
so you can use the neck as information.
Information. And the only whether I'm riding or doing groundwork, The only rein use I really use is alternating pressure left and right rein aids in order to stabilize the skull and the cervical spine between the shoulders to the back, all the way
Yep.
to the tail,
Okay.
because that's an unsupported huge appendage. So on horses, they use the head and neck both as part of the axial skeleton, but also an appendage like the legs. It has dual functions,
Yeah.
right? So as you're going, like just there in your hands, she tugged on the right rein and
Yep.
loosened the left rein.
Yep.
That's how we feel invisible lateral bends and rotation issues,
Gotcha.
right? If they drop the back, we see the head go up in her case, the neck shorten, and we kind of feel that instability back and forth between the two reins, or dramatically tight on one rein and the opposite rein loose.
Yep. Yep. Totally felt that
Mhm.
many a time. Yep.
So just there, do you see the change?
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
that's how you know that the horse has both a minimal degree of engagement
Hmm.
and internal straightness,
Hmm.
right? They typically go from the posture of extension to the posture of long and low as a transitional posture before we can lift the back.
She
Now,
absolutely through after this phase goes quite long and low.
yeah, that
Yeah.
to me is a gentle way of building an engaged hindquarter and lifting the back. All of the mentors I've ever worked with are highly allergic to long and low. They hate it. And I just kept finding it brought ease into the process for the horse. And the best way to explain it is if you take your arm
Hmm.
and you shorten your bicep, that's the tension that they have in their back when they're dropping the back or when they're severely crooked,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So if you just drop your arm
Yeah.
and let it fall, that to me is long and low.
Yeah.
When they lift the back with your arm dangling, lengthen your arm muscles, and with contraction, you're going to lift your hand to your shoulder. That's how they lift the back. That's eccentric contraction. It's
Gotcha.
a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot
And
of
it's
work.
also a very different feeling than this. And I can
Yes,
imagine how it would be hard to go from this
to that.
to that.
That's
That's very wonky. Yeah.
because then you're asking literally for what's called isotonic contractions. So if you go from shortening to lengthening without releasing the contraction,
Yeah.
and that's the theoretical ideal, even with people who are highly educated, and theoretically that would be the thing to do. I go, but if I do it on my own arm, that's freaking hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so that if the body is habituated into shortening, every time I try to lengthen without releasing the contraction, the horses kept pulling back to shortening.
Yeah. Because I'm sure they have no idea how to feel safe or stable there. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And I agree theoretically, but I go on a practical level, even stretching chronically tight muscles and letting them hang can be painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if you've ever taken a yoga class, you go, it's not all that comfortable to find suppleness sometimes.
Yeah.
So, so this posture here is what you're looking for on the long reins, or she may, because of her issues, her breed, and all of that, I wouldn't be surprised if she had a nose in the dirt version of long and low.
It can definitely get close to that. I haven't seen fully like a few inches from the sand, but compared to where she started years and years ago, where I mean, it was literally that she could break my nose with her neck sometimes. Um, I was just so happy for any version of releasing down and longer and out. And now that was years ago, but in the weakness and instability, um, it's still very much the chosen. If I go from extension to long and low and then find I mean, a step or two of actually, I don't know what we'd call it. I mean, just level in the balance or very
What
few
I
steps.
what I consider basic balance, and what I
Yeah.
find most often is most horses have to get out of the posture of extension, be able to be in long and low for 10 consecutive minutes, and
Mm.
from halt to in walk, 10
Oh
minutes,
boy. Okay.
from
Yep. Yep.
walk into trot for 10 consecutive minutes.
We are nowhere close to that. Yep.
And
Yep.
that means you have fully overcome the habit of going into extension. You've reconditioned the muscles, you've reconditioned the nervous system.
Gotcha.
So if a horse can give me 10 minutes of long and low because they're
Hmm.
stuck there, then I'm
Hmm.
going to move on into what I consider basic balance. And
Gotcha.
basic balance is more of a long and level frame,
Yep.
but more
Yep.
importantly, it is a stable frame. It is where they unload their own front legs.
Yep.
And so basic balance to me is a minimal degree of upward spinal flexion. And even if we went to the uber athletic competitive version of maximum spinal flexion, that axial skeleton is still horizontal over gravity. So
Okay.
the whole thing, the whole body goes up. It doesn't,
Gotcha.
it does
That's
tip
whoa.
forward in long and
Okay.
low,
Okay.
but it does not tip
Yeah.
backwards when we
Okay.
say uphill, right?
I nor does it bow like
Nor does
this.
it bow. It
Okay.
just,
Okay.
you
Gotcha.
think of it as sort of a straight line through the torso. And when it's at a minimal degree where they can control their body weight and find essential stability, then it's a long frame but balanced,
Yeah. Gotcha.
right? And we think the shorter frame is a result of going the opposite way, uphill, right? It's actually just straight up.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's what gives us suspension. That's what frees up the limbs.
That
So
makes a
the pole becomes the highest point because the torso is lifting.
yeah. So it's just a rising tide brings up all boats. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a couple of things just on this video
Yes. Oh,
is
please.
where you lose the contact, where you lose the
Mm,
connection is, and you're a little busy with your arms,
mm,
it's because you are walking faster than her.
gotcha. Okay.
So whenever the reins become slack,
Yep.
slow down your feet. Okay. We want to go slow enough that you feel a little bit like a human plow.
Human plow.
Not
It's like
that
an
she's
exercise in
pulling you. Like I sort of imagine if I were on roller skates or ice skates, I would let her pull me along. So I'm not going against the motion. I'm not digging in, entrenching myself, but I'm going slower than the horse until the reins start to just, my arms are completely relaxed and I'm
Mhm,
controlling my speed.
mhm.
And when I nail the right speed and I synchronize with her, I get a rein contact and she tugs my elbows open a little bit.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Okay.
No,
Then
that makes
I don't ever have to adjust my rein length or even move my arm to give a left right aid. If I
mm,
match the speed, and what you're going to find
it
is
changes.
how it changes all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not easy to synchronize precisely with a changing speed, but it is possible.
Gotcha.
So if we say a loose rein, if we called it a one when it's slack, and her pulling you literally would be a 10,
Mhm.
I look for a 3, 4, 5. I
Gotcha.
go something that is like holding hands. It's definitely connected, but not, I don't get the sensation I'm being dragged,
Yep.
and I
Yep.
never lose the connection.
Yep.
So, as my contact, if we say a 5 is ideal, as soon as the contact on both reins is going 5, 4, 3, I know to slow down.
Okay.
As soon as the
Gotcha.
contact is going 5, 6, 7, I know to speed up.
Yeah.
So
And
that
it
way, I'm not moving my arms. I'm always just adjusting my speed.
makes total sense theoretically, and it's like a complete exercise in like a walking meditation.
Yes, it is. You have to
Very
pay.
good. It's just I've got to I know exactly the feel that you're describing under saddle, and the long range just feel so uncoordinated for me. So I just need the practice to and know where to put my focus during it. So to know just to watch my speed better. And
It also trains the rider to stay in the middle of unpredictable movement.
very
It's
good point.
very beneficial for
Yeah.
how you use your center,
Yeah.
matching and I mean precisely matching the speed. Harder than it looks to people.
Yeah.
But when you nail it, you basically feel like you're driving in a cart or you're plowing a field or you're getting pulled along on roller skates. And it's that connection from our center to her center through the reins
Hmm.
that starts to create a corridor with the reins that she bumps into,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So as she bumps into your right rein, right, then the right rein gets a little heavier, the left rein gets a little looser. All I typically need to do, if I'm matching the speed appropriately, all
Right.
I do is close my hand on the heavy rein. I
Okay.
don't pull it.
Find your resistance. Yep. Yep.
So if you think about it, if your rein length is equal,
Hmm.
left to right, and you're matching the speed precisely, then you feel every little change of force between the left and right rein, right?
The big
And
if there, if I'm matching for speed well, but yes, yes.
yeah,
It theoretically very much get it. And then I'm also just having light bulb moments about why I get so damn busy under saddle with her, even in
yeah.
the tack walk. But anyways, yep.
So
Yep.
right here where I paused it, you're
That's
already
good.
doing it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's
It's just
it.
very erratic for me. Like it just like her, I come into a decent feel and then probably the next step or 2 seconds later, I'm just sort of jumping around again or mismatching the speed.
So
But I
what's
think,
happening is your walk is very steady and
hmm
hers is not.
hmm
So these moments, just where I paused it, is her matching you,
gotcha.
right? And as
Gotcha.
soon as she changes, you guys are out of sync.
Yes.
Then you
Yep.
get busy with your hands because you
Yep.
feel the loss.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is she's going to adjust speed. That's a given because she's unstable. But you can synchronize with that adjustment precisely and never ever lose this feeling right here.
Gotcha.
Yep. So she kind of
Gotcha.
matched you by happy accident, but she couldn't hold it,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so you're going to match her on purpose so
Yeah.
that it always feels like this. And
Gotcha.
once you have a consistent essential, say 5 and 5,
Mhm.
you're on a consistent rein length. So you're not having to lengthen or shorten either rein. You're just adjusting your speed.
Mhm.
Then you absolutely feel any and all discrepancies between the left rein and the right rein.
Yeah.
And they're minimal because you're in sync. So it really doesn't take much more than closing your fingers on the heavy rein until you feel her
Go back
shift.
to the middle. Yeah.
And she's the one that restores the equality between the reins when she's straight.
Mm.
And you confirm that by her lengthening the neck.
Gotcha.
Does that make
When
sense?
Totally. When I'm walking, when I'm in the ground driving position, and of course I can't see the neck unless the pull were quite high and I'm seeing, the neck come up.
Mhm.
Is it just that I feel the evenness of the reins and then more steadiness of the pace, and that helps me know where we are as far as quality of alignment? Okay.
You'll feel when she lengthens the neck, she'll either speed up or slow down,
Mhm.
and you'll feel both reins change.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So most horses, when they're really coming out of extension and into what I would call an authentic long and low, they're also going to change the speed.
Yeah.
And that then we can kind of see that they lengthen their neck from this back view because the head disappears completely.
Gotcha.
It's
Okay.
it's between the front legs. We don't see it left or right, and it's below the withers, so we can't see it over their tail.
Okay.
So it's kind of the disappearance of the head and neck that tells you she's in long and low. And
Gotcha.
also the thing to watch, whether you're doing long reins from the inside or you're doing ground driving from behind, is train yourself to watch the top of the pelvis.
Yes.
right?
That I almost hyperfixate on. I have to sometimes relax myself to like, I think when I pay more attention to her pace and my pace, that might help me not fixate on the levelness of the pelvis.
Well, what you'll feel is there's a direct correlation to what you visually see happening in the pelvis to the feel of the long reins.
Mm,
So even though the long reins are attached to the head and neck, the feel we're receiving on each long rein, no matter how we're using them, actually correlates to the pelvic movement because that's what's changing the body weight.
yep. Yep.
So you'll see that when the left side of the pelvis is high, usually the left rein will be heavier and the right will be slack, and vice
Yep.
versa, right?
Gotcha.
So you'll also see when you resist, you're not taking the rein, but you're not giving the rein. You're just
Right.
closing your hand
Yep.
and you're waiting for her to kind of figure out that readjustment.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that rein lightens, the pelvis will change, and the head and neck use will change. All of that happens together.
Gotcha.
Does that make
No,
sense?
absolutely. No. I just
So,
really appreciate the clarity of description though. So thank you.
yeah. And I like that you're working on a wall because the
Yes.
wall is part of the support.
I can't
So,
even do outdoor without a fence. It's pretty sad. We're so wobbly.
no,
So
you're giving her the support she needs for now. The
yeah.
only reason the wall is doing more of the work than the long reins right now is because you're mismatching the speed. You're
Gotcha.
not in sync with the speed. As soon as you figure out how to get perfectly in sync with her speed, you walking parallel to the rail is part of the straightness,
Hmm.
but it has to be with an ever-changing speed that she chooses.
Gotcha.
Then you're gonna really feel every detail in the alignment and the rotation.
Totally.
Excellent. Okay, so let me, whoops. Where'd they go? Hang on.
There you
There
go.
it is.
Yep.
Okay. So this is the other direction.
I believe, yes, that is tracking right.
Okay. Oh,
Yep.
whoops. There's a little arrow. Yes, harder for her tracking right. You can see a little bit the right hind issue. It's
Yep.
just a little more peg-legged. It's not lame.
Yep.
It's just that she's higher on the right hip and a little more peg-legged on that to the right. Now, with very little rein contact, she sort of gets herself straight up against the wall. But what you're at are what I would call the last few degrees of spinal extension.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
she's not completely upside down. She's very close to like there's okay, more degrees of extension in that moment, right? That's the more obvious version. But when she's lengthening her neck and she sort of looks long and level, there's a sneaky version of extension that happens to a lot, professionals especially. It's
Hmm.
just because it's subtle. And what they do is they don't quite come out of extension. It's the last few degrees, and they begin holding through the neck and back. So it's
Gotcha.
longer, not as short as more degrees.
Hmm.
It can mimic the posture visually of long and level, right? But it becomes isometric holding,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
So they're sort of doing this. They're going from the short, 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 and they're sort of lengthening, but they're not really suppling.
I see.
Does that make sense? And
It
they can
does.
kind of hold there with just
Yep.
less shortening, right? And that does not change the leg kinematics. You still get a lot of hyper rotation. Those are kind of the signs that you're there,
Yep.
even though she looks long and level at some moments.
And I
Does-
definitely understand you describing that just because, especially, if I tack walk her, you just still feel that even when um, the neck looks a bit more long and level, and I feel that I'm sitting relatively level, there's still a tightness through the top line and almost a shallowness in her breathing, and just things that where if someone were to look, they're like, it looks good, but from the feeling up there that you're like, it's still not truly what we're looking for.
Now,
because
this
I
is
remember
what you were talking about coming to the inside to keep her on the path. So that switch, when you switch your body position, you did it very well. The main difference in this position is the inside rein
Mhm.
becomes a static length.
Okay.
It becomes the radius between you and the horse, whether you're
Okay.
moving or standing still, whether you're on the rail or on a circle.
Okay.
As soon as your body's on the inside instead of directly behind, you're now more directly affecting rotation and sometimes increasing lateral bend at the front end in order
Right.
to stabilize rotation at the hind end.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It
So the
totally does.
outside
Yep.
bend that she shows and the
Yes.
amount of leverage you need just to
Yeah.
keep her tracking straight
Yeah.
is the rotation issue. And they're always coupled, lateral bend and rotation. But just there, that was perfect. This is exactly what I would expect her to look like on a circle to the right.
Yeah.
And I get this question a lot. This is also part of an initiation into my work. Why is
The
the horse
counter
bent to
on the
the
circle.
outside on
Yeah.
a circle,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Feels wrong. So I want you to look at this moment where her neck is straight,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you can see the inside hip is lower,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Very much. Yeah.
And if we kind of watch across the back or pelvis as best we can, that's actually as soon as you come to this position with the long reins, that's the action of the long reins is directly to the pelvis and low back. So the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis on a horse, I call it the box because it acts as one unit.
Yep.
The thoracic spine, I call the ball
Right. Right.
because it moves a little differently,
Yeah.
right?
And then
And
the
then
triangle you do, right? Oh no,
either
sorry.
the, well,
The-
I call it the T or I call it the noodle because
Okay.
it's the most mobile part of the spine when we get into the neck and shoulders. It can kind of go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So we want to straighten the noodle, but if the box is already tilted or unstable, no amount of straightening the noodle is going to get the box stable. So what the long reins from the inside do is level and square the box, even if the noodle has to bend to the outside to achieve that.
Yeah. Yep.
Does that make sense?
Totally. And I kind of know enough to expect it. It is what it is for now with the quote unquote look of the counterflexion. And that I definitely see that if I spend a longer time working her on a circle, that she does come straighter in the neck as she finds more of her own stability in the
Yes.
pelvic region.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. And again, guaranteed, voluntary,
Yeah.
spontaneous because
Yeah.
it's dynamic.
Yeah.
It just, they all straighten out their neck after the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis become stable.
Yeah.
So the horse being bent to the outside when you're working on the inside with the long reins, it just tells you how unstable the back and hindquarters are. But
Right.
the path to it is the outside bend, the path
That
to
we
regaining
work through.
stability. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we watch her back and hindquarters, you see when she puts slack on the inside rein, her body weight is falling in. When you
Mm-hmm.
pull the hindquarters towards you, like you do here, the top
Yep.
of the pelvis and the back get level.
Yep.
The inside front abducts, which is where it should go.
Right.
But as soon as that inside rein is slack, we need the outside rein to regain a straight radius. No matter where that puts the front end, it's putting the hindquarters level and on the path. So this is confusing. It literally took me 15 years at least to explain this.
I can
And I
imagine.
didn't even teach it for a long time because it looked
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I knew it worked, but I didn't know how,
Yeah.
right? And it looked wrong. I was like, okay, then don't do it. So, but it works the oblique muscles. You get light adduction and abduction. It prevents the outside bend of the neck is part of what's preventing her falling with her weight to the inside front.
Yeah.
And in the back end, that bend is adjusting the rotation so that it's becoming upright.
Can I pause you to ask a question there
Hmm.
about what you said? That outside bend of the neck prevents her from falling to the right front. And one thing I want to make sure I get my head around there is I think it was an oversimplification when I was taught earlier, but I was always taught that if a horse is like laterally flexed the one direction, that the weight goes to the opposite front leg.
Oh, that is a wild card.
Gotcha.
Everybody, it's like inside leg to outside rein.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
go, no, the
Like
whole,
there could be 1,000 mechanisms at play there, right?
and it just depends on way too many factors to predict how any particular horse is going to overload which front leg.
Okay. That's
But
just so validating because I'm like, I don't always feel that, but everyone says that, and it's just very confusing. So that is very validating.
so,
Okay.
like a normal, uncomplicated left-handed horse pattern
Yep.
is going to have an invisible left lateral bend,
Yep.
dorsal tips of the spine rotated left,
Yep.
body weight left,
Yep.
bulk of the barrel right, muscle tension on the right.
Yep.
That's going to create a pancake left foot and an
Yep.
upright right foot on the
And
front.
kind of a bulgy right shoulder going around
A
turns.
bulgy right shoulder
Yep.
and a slabby falling
Yep.
down left shoulder.
Left shoulder. Yep.
That's
Yep.
what I call a clean dysfunction. I go, that's easy. You're very, that's easy to fix, right? No
Very
matter
few
how
are
in,
that clean. Yeah.
but what you have is another layer on top of that because you have the EPM, because you have the instability, because she was upside down for too long, right? So once they go into extension, it's a wild card how they stabilize, right?
Thank you so much. Because I'm just like, oh my God, my brain feels so much better. Because sometimes I just break myself inside out trying to understand how that head goes left, weight goes right, like oversimplification thing applies. So I'm
Right. So I have a really complicated horse on my playlist, Wexford Training Barn called Hercules.
Hercules. Okay, I'll make
hmm
sure to watch. Yeah.
And Hercules had the most severe rotation of his spine chronically. Like he's just a complicated guy.
Yeah.
And what was so complicated about him was how he ended up using his neck because I think someone tied his head around at one point. And when they rotate the neck bones, the whole neck rotates as one unit, C1 through 7.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can bend the neck through different vertebra, but they can't rotate the neck in isolation. It's one unit. And
Yeah.
he had done that. And so what was interesting was even though he had the most severe left-handed pattern I had ever been on, his right front was the pancake foot and his left foot was the clubby one.
Wow. That hurts my brain
So I
now.
know it hurt my
Yeah.
brain too, but he
Yeah.
had layers of complications. So that's why I go, it's unpredictable. It is unique to the individual. How
Yeah.
they figure out how to stabilize dysfunctionally
Yeah.
can be anywhere, everywhere. And you scratch your head going, I didn't even know that was possible.
Right.
Right.
Right. Here it is in front of me. Yeah.
So, like
Cool.
my horse, Rafalco, who's on that same playlist, when he drops his back, he puts his neck forward and down,
Mm-hmm.
but it
Mm.
has a curl.
Got
So
right.
it's
Yeah.
still a shortening of the neck, but I was like, how can a horse put their head and neck down and drop their back? And I go, it's possible. Anything is possible. I go, that's what I've learned. Anything and everything is possible. The good news is the dysfunction is complicated. The balance is simple.
Right. You at least know what you're aiming for.
Yes,
It's
once you know what you're looking for,
yeah.
your body use or whatever aid you're giving is always trying to generate these lines of force that are front to back, stable and straight, left to right, stable and straight, and up to down, stable and straight. That
Mhm.
always tells us we have the right mechanical coordination.
Mm,
So we actually work with the forces of motion, not the mechanics.
gotcha.
And there's still a whole lot of thought out there, even with people who are well educated in mechanics, that we're here to manipulate body parts. And I
Yeah.
go, oh, no, we're not. We're here to manage and channel the forces of motion, just like a river.
Yeah.
I go, it's a flow of force. And when the river feels like it's crazy, like a rapids, that's dysfunctional use. And when it's balanced, it feels like one of those lazy river hotel swimming pools.
Yeah. Just
Like,
takes you along with it. Yeah.
yeah, it's a regular rate of flow. There's not a lot of waves. It's a narrow channel. It's an easy ride. I go,
Mm-hmm.
that's what balance feels like.
Mm,
So when we just aim for that, we
right.
leave the horse the space
Choice. Yep.
to adjust in ways that feel comfortable as you go.
And I think that's where the ease that you mentioned comes into it. It's like it just
Absolutely.
gives them room to find their own comfort and creates ease for both parties. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and
Cool.
even though
That was
humans can grit through physical therapy because we have imagination. We know if it feels worse, it's going to feel better. Horses don't have that capacity.
yeah.
So horses, as soon as they feel a unique level of discomfort as a threshold for them, they're going to protect themselves. They're not going to explore.
Absolutely.
So that's why it's so important that we're always leading the horse to more comfort, because as soon as they experience discomfort,
They're
you're
going to brace.
triggering instinct, you're triggering old habits, and you're making them protect themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I would say you could play with both. When
Okay.
you change on the ground driving, whether you're going left or right, I think if you match her speed, she might not fall in so much when you go to the right. You might have more control if you're a little more matching her speed. But if you have to go to the circles, then what I would do, because she does have lots of forward, that's the benefit of the breed. So there's
It's
a,
better now. We actually used to stop a lot in the or like a month ago on the long lines. It was more stopping than going, but we're
okay.
getting there.
So that lengthening of the neck is more authentic. And you
Gotcha. Yeah.
see the reins are also more equal.
Yes. Very
That's how
much.
you know, right? So you could work her from the inside on the wall or
Hmm.
on circles.
Hmm.
You could basically play with ground driving and working like the position behind and the position from the inside, no matter your path of travel, either way.
Yep. I follow.
Okay. If just getting her straight, like if you're working behind her and you start matching the speed and she goes into long and low, then keep your path of travel easy. She's got
Hmm.
enough engagement to get
Hmm.
out of extension.
Cool.
If going straight, you lose steering significantly, she loses control over her speed, stopping a lot or rushing, or she can't stay in long and low. Then you want to start playing with turns and circles because that's how you address engagement
Okay.
and stabilize the hindquarter.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's just
And
clear when I move to what and why. So that's
yeah. And
yep.
every horse is unique. So I go to get out of extension, they need stability and a minimal degree of engagement of the hindquarter, and they need internal straightness, which is two functions.
Mhm.
Which one they need today, they show you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Really
Because
good.
whatever you work on, if she's not giving you an authentic shift of lengthening the neck into a long and low posture, then you still have an issue with straightness or an issue with engagement. It's not there yet.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yep.
And then what you'll see is a lot of horses can fully release into long and low, but they can't hold it at first.
Right.
So
Right.
again, if you're on a straight line working on straightness and she can hold the long and low posture, then you do it that way. If she can't that way, then you need to work on circles. That
Yep.
will be the ticket.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. And then, like I said, you just need long and low for 10 consecutive minutes in the walk to the left and to the right.
Hmm. Okay.
Then
So
you
if
have
that happens on circles or straightaways, it doesn't really matter. But you just
eventually it will be both and all,
okay.
but we look for the path of least resistance to get the change of coordination first.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And it might happen to the left first, but tracking right might take more time,
Hmm.
right? You might do circles to the right, straight lines to the left. You can be as creative as she tells you you need to be.
Yeah.
But anything that helps her get into the posture of long and low is what you repeat first.
Makes
That's
total.
getting a global change of the body, which is
Yeah.
where we need to kind of get a little bit of nervous system, muscle memory going before we challenge it with other directions, other speeds, other exercises.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. Very, very clear.
Excellent. So I think there was a little arrow here. Yeah. I'm just going to kind of bip through the other.
Oh God, yeah. No, and whatever I don't even know where we are. We might even be. I
Here
want
we
to make sure
go.
we're not going over time.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. I want to make sure we cover everything you need to know. So this was the hand walking at the end.
Yep. Just to,
Yeah, so you can see it down her midline. That is
it's
not a
huge.
broomstick,
Yeah.
that's a noodle, right?
Yeah.
So we need to
Yep.
turn the noodle into a broomstick. And it's not a matter of forcing it, it's a matter of channeling it. So your aids are always resisting dissipation left and right and channeling it
Yeah.
forward, kind of coalescing all that dissipation of force into a straight line, pole to tail, and a level line
Mhm.
across the pelvis, across the saddle area, across the shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I think one
It's
question I
not bad. Like, this is not nearly as bad as where I normally start with people, despite her issues. And her fetlocks did not even catch my attention. Like, I
I've
had,
that's music to my ears.
no, in fact, the long line lesson I just did with, it's under Horse Geeks lessons. It's the last one I did with Tracy, her
Mhm.
horse Stitch. I did have that
Oh,
conversation with.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I've watched a few of her lessons.
Mhm.
I've not honed in on
No,
his.
her most recent one, we had that specific discussion because he was getting a little anxious and she
Mhm.
was wondering about lunging him or working him in the round pen. But when we looked at the last video, I think it's the last lesson I posted maybe in the Horse Geeks lessons playlist.
Yeah.
We specifically, you'll see when I think it looks bad.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Your
Okay.
horse,
Okay.
your horse does not look bad.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's really good to know.
yeah.
Yeah, because it's just sometimes, you get diagnoses and you obsess. And so it's, yeah.
Yeah, I would say any inflammation in especially the suspensory, is really just part of the compensation package. It's
Yeah.
it's just a strain because the midline is so unstable. It's
Right.
sort of that leaning and having, whether it's joint or soft tissue of taking the brunt, it's just because she's using the legs for stability because the midline is so unstable.
Yeah. One other question I had, I guess it's a two-part question is walk, halt, halt, walk transitions bring her into pretty extreme extension. So I haven't been doing them as a transition work
Mm-mm,
thing on
don't.
the long line. Is that okay? All right. So
Yeah.
that's okay. Let
Yep.
other things get more stable. Okay, great.
Yep.
And
No, for
then
some
um
horses, some horses, the trot is the easiest gait to start.
yeah,
For other horses, the walk is the easiest. For many horses, the halt to walk to halt transition is the hardest.
definitely a hard one.
Yeah.
Um, and then the only other question I had is I've been doing all like 98% walk work because a few weeks ago she ran around a little extra when her buddy left and unfortunately tweaked the left front superficial digital flexor tendon injury a bit and for a couple days was a little off at the trot and then has been sound since. But since then I've been doing mainly walk. When I look at the trot just a little bit, I just ask her to trot, and then as soon as she wants to break, it's usually, 10, 15 steps of trot. I just let her break. But
Absolutely.
the posture itself is actually, knock on wood, pretty good in the trot. But I just don't make her trot ever. Does that seem like the
Yeah.
right?
You
Okay.
can you can play with it. Like for
Okay.
some horses, if they're healthy enough, exploring walk, trot, canter, trot, walk is
Yeah.
just a way to sort of mix up the habits or work through emotional issues related to speed or work through tension, especially tight horses that don't want to go forward. It's a way just to kind of get things rolling.
Okay.
I don't expect them to be balanced. I just play with the speeds for that reason.
Gotcha.
When I work with lameness issues, which is my barn, we
Yeah.
walk a lot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We walk in the summer when it's hot, and we
Yep.
walk until, like, it took at least 2 years of walk work for my warm blood, who has navicular changes and ring bone on both fronts, which is why I got him for free. Um, he could not trot or canter for a period of time without going lame.
Right.
So the
Right.
good news is, when we're talking balance and spinal functions and coordination, the ideal coordination and stability of the axial skeleton is exactly the same, whether it's walk, trot, canter, through transitions, tracking left or right.
Yep.
And so I can work on it anywhere.
Yep. Yep.
And Hercules is another one because he would not go forward. He had multiple pain issues. He has walked for, oh my God, mostly walked for about a decade, unwinding him, right?
Yeah.
And his body looks phenomenal because the muscle development is dictated by skeletal coordination. I go, the only reason I play with trot and canter is to kind of wake up the muscle use and
Right.
skeletal coordination. But if they don't have a good trot or a good canter, I go, why repeat it? Or
Yep.
if it makes them lame, I can completely change the coordination at the walk if I have to,
Gotcha.
and
Gotcha.
remuscle the horse beautifully at the walk. It
You
does not require speed.
must have the patience of a saint, though. That's deeply admirable.
Well, once you get into this, to me, the rate at which horses change and the precision of what balance means, like we're talking gymnastic precision, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go, I am so overwhelmed with the detail that the walk is fascinating.
I
The
gotcha.
rate at which things change is hard to keep up with, even at the walk.
Yeah.
And I go, people think the
Yeah.
walk
I
is
see.
boring because they're not focused internally.
Right.
When you
Right.
take an internal focus and start to be aware of all the different changes of direction and amount of force related to coordinations,
Yep.
it's fascinating. That current of energy is constantly changing, and it's hard for humans to keep up with it even at the walk.
Right.
So,
Right. It's probably like they are walking when they start to really understand the complexity.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. And the trot and the canter, theoretically, it's like if I'm right-handed, I don't become left-handed because I'm going faster.
Mm, yeah.
The trot and the
Yeah.
canter do not change the habitual coordination. It
Yeah.
only adds more force to what's already happening.
Right. Right.
So that's why they get lame. If you leave them in the same coordination and you trot and canter, they go
You add
lame
force to that.
faster,
Yep. For sure.
right?
Yep.
Where you can reverse the coordination and correct the all the issues without the concussion of trot and canter. And even if I don't practice the trot and canter change and improve because I've changed the coordination.
Yeah. 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 Gotcha.
So I go, why practice a trot or canter that makes my horse lame?
Right.
Or
Right.
why reinforce the coordination of a bad trot or a bad canter? I
Especially
don't
if it's
get it.
harder for them to fix, right? In the trotter, they
Hmm.
can't. Some of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
So,
some horses will find the coordination in the trot. Rarely do I find it takes a canter.
yeah. Yeah.
But some horses, it's easier in the trot because the back muscles don't work as hard during the same coordination.
Mm.
So, but if I have a lameness issue, that's not an option.
I think the
So,
only other question I have there around adding that little bit of trot is there are some days where the stifle gets more unstable as the walk increases a little bit of speed and push to get to the trot. And it doesn't seem to bother her that much. She doesn't show a large stress response to it. But internally, I get cringy when, one of her, when she gets that like upward fixation of the patella for a stride or two, getting into the trot or coming from the trot to the walk. So
so let
basically,
her guide you,
okay. Yeah.
because as you change the coordination, what you're
Yeah.
going to see that looks horrifying is anything she was masking,
Yeah. Very
right?
much.
So you're going to see the lameness. The way
Yeah.
I know it's okay to play with trot and canter is because the horse doesn't resist me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I go, if they're resisting it, they're too uncomfortable.
Okay.
If they're losing their mind because it's overwhelming, it tells me they're too
Cool.
unstable,
Yep.
right? So if they're too unstable or too uncomfortable, they're going to resist trotting or can't come back from fast speeds easily.
Yep.
And I go, that also tells me it's not appropriate to work on yet. If
Yep.
she's kind of calm and concentrating, I look at it as my job to gently request the
Right.
trot, and
Right.
it's always her choice to break gait
Yep. Gotcha.
whenever she needs,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And if she chooses to trot again, great. If she doesn't
Okay.
choose, I sort of try to help reestablish the stability at the walk and then try it again.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. That's what we do. We never, without regaining stability and me requesting again, we do not volunteer trot at this point.
Okay, that's
Uh,
fine. Then
yep.
you can play with it on request as long
Okay.
as you always allow her choice for the downward.
Perfect. Very clear.
Because once they get unstable, if we insist they keep trotting, we actually teach them to trot dysfunctionally.
I see that. No, because I've
Hmm.
made that mistake for years in the past and it just gets worse. And our stress goes up
Yeah.
and our
Yeah.
body
And I
dysfunction
go, it
looks bad.
drives
Yep.
humans crazy when horses break gait. But I go, making
Well,
a
because
horse hold the trot or canter
yeah.
and not letting them break when they want to a slower speed. I go, you're just stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. Like
Yeah.
those transitions are the gold nuggets for balance. Why would you disallow them?
I think there's a very silly cultural notion that we're trained to think it's somehow disrespectful. It's
It's
just,
related to obedience. And I
yes.
go, you have to get out of the obedience mindset. You
Yep.
have to, in order to work on balance, all behavior is an expression of something.
Absolutely.
And that's what we have to understand. It's not about being obedient or disobedient.
Amen.
I know, right?
That's the one message that can get out there. That is, yeah,
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah,
Thank you
because the
so much.
bad behavior, quote unquote, is that it's the horse screaming at us. I'm either afraid, I'm in fear, or I'm in discomfort.
Yeah, very much.
And
Yeah.
so, yes, absolutely. That's the amen.
Yes. Thank you. This is really, really helpful. I
Good.
feel so appreciative that I can get help in this area because it's boy, you just wish you had it years and years ago, but it is what it
Do
is.
I know, right? Let me stop the recording.